Thank you for joining me today. My name is Cherish Dela Cruz, and I help female physicians create estate, life, and business plans that protect their families and their hard earned assets. Today, I will be discussing asset protection for female physicians. This is not legal advice, but potential strategies you should look into as a physician. Now, there are some common client themes that I have discussed with my physician clients, especially if they are business owners. They are concerned about keeping the business going if they become sick or disabled. They want to ensure that they have a plan in place for either the sale of a business or to potentially pass that business along to family members or other partners. They want to protect the assets of the business and protect their own personal assets. Additionally, they want to protect their potential beneficiaries' inheritance. Now, today, we'll be focusing on potential strategies for protecting your assets as a physician, and then also protecting your potential beneficiaries' inheritance. Unfortunately, you as a physician are exposed to lawsuits because of your occupations. We live in a very litigious society. More and more lawsuits are filed each year. And generally, over 20 million civil cases are filed annually. Because you are in this high risk occupation, you are considered to be more exposed than the average individual. Now, you want to think about the reasons why you would want to protect your assets. Essentially, you want to protect what you have, but also grow what you have. So any type of planning that you would have in place for that. As we discussed, we live in a society. People are always looking for a scapegoat. And unfortunately, you as a physician are exposed to this. Essentially, you also want to have any type of damage control if you do get sued. You also want to be able to have peace of mind and protect your family and your assets as well as your business. Now, in considering and protecting your assets, you first need to understand what asset protection planning is. Now, think of asset protection as preserving your wealth by managing risks with techniques that discourage lawsuits. It also promotes settlement on debtor favorable terms. And if ever questioned, it prevents a truthful story that could be freely disclosed to the court and creditors. Now, you may be thinking, well, what are some strategies and what kind of situations would I need to protect myself from? You want to protect yourself from future creditors, divorce, lawsuits, or judgments. Now, we will be discussing in the next few slides some legal and lawful techniques that you, in conjunction with your estate planning attorney, can deter a lawsuit. And even if you do get sued, it can provide you with some leverage with settlement negotiation power. Now, asset protection planning isn't only for the extremely rich. It's for people in high risk occupations like physicians. It's also become much more popular with ordinary Americans. Sometimes asset protection strategies may involve other family members, or if you're trying to protect your beneficiaries' inheritance, it's important to communicate those strategies with your children so that there is no surprise. Now, your first line of defense is always going to be, in a lawsuit, is always going to be malpractice insurance or another type of insurance. Think of this, of asset protection in layers. Then you can think of asset protection in terms of the type of business structure that you choose. Some corporate structures are more favorable than others. If you are concerned about the potential of divorce, you may want to consider having a prenuptial agreement. Now, with any of these strategies, timing is key. Like with any type of estate planning, it needs to be proactive. Regardless of what business entity or trust structure you use, the timing and the transfer are both more important. It is difficult to attack from a lawsuit perspective a properly designed limited partnership or irrevocable trust. However, it's easy to attack an improper transfer. So one of the key statutes that is out there concerning transfers is the Uniform Fraudulent Transfers Act. But it analyzes things in terms of timing, solvency, the value that was transferred, and the intent of the person transferring it. Now, depending on where you live, the statute of limitations varies among certain circumstances and jurisdictions. So it's important to speak with an attorney who is well versed in this area. If a potential creditor brings a claim outside the applicable period, then the transfer will stand. However, if the creditor brings a claim within the applicable period, then you need to think, your attorney will need to think and prove, and the other person who's bringing the lawsuit will have to prove insolvency. Now, the easiest way to avoid a transfer attack is to make sure that any type of transfer that you're making is for fair market value, because fair market value will always be respected. And the court would also look to the intent of the transfer. So the court will also be looking for any potentials of fraud. So if you were to transfer your asset, some of the considerations that the court may consider is whether or not the debtor was insolvent at the time or soon after the transfer. Was the transfer made for a reasonably equivalent value? And if you did make a transfer to someone else, was it concealed from creditors? And if you, as the debtor, incurred a substantial debt, like a judgment from a lawsuit? And was the transfer directly or indirectly transferred to an insider? Now, these are some questions that the court might be asking. And so it's important for you to consult with an attorney who has knowledge of this and is very familiar with this statute. Another important part is picking the right jurisdiction when forming an entity or a trust, or deciding where to establish domicile or assets. It forces a creditor to pick which laws would be applicable. The next thing that you want to think about is whether or not you, as a potential business owner, have the right business structure to protect your assets. Sole proprietorship have very limited asset or none or no asset protection. And then there's also the limited liability company and a corporation or an S corporation. You want to be able to separate your liabilities from your assets. And so you can do that in several ways. So there's certain types of corporate forms that are more favorable than the others, as discussed here. And then also where that structure is. Delaware and other states are more favorable to corporations. And so selecting the right company form and jurisdiction is important to discuss with your estate planning attorney. Another strategy to look at is trust planning. Now, irrevocable trust, think of this as a closed box. Actual control of the trust assets must be surrendered to a third-party trustee. You, as a physician, wouldn't own the assets of an irrevocable trust, and thus creditors generally cannot get those assets in an irrevocable trust. Sometimes it's helpful to have the consent of a trust protector, which is an individual who is designated to protect the intent of the trust. And now another thing is a third party cannot force the person who's creating the trust to revoke the trust, to amend or modify it, or to change where the trust was created. Also, in terms of protecting your assets for beneficiaries, some of the additional strategies that you may consider are continued trusts. Also, which are trusts that continue past an individual's either lifetime or they continue on to the next generation. Also, it eliminates outright distribution where there is no asset protection. A revocable living trust has no protection whatsoever. So in making these considerations, these are just some of the few strategies that you can implement as a physician. But it's important to discuss this with an attorney who's well-versed in this area, but also to consider all of the factors that we have discussed here. If you would like additional information, you can reach out to me at 770-687-8813, or reach out to me at my individual email address, cherish@delacruz-law.com. I'm happy to help you. I'm licensed both in Florida and Georgia. Thanks for joining.